And then I think you secretly want to be Ken?
Oh, yeah, that's right. Ken.
He's my new role model.
Ma'am.
Absolutely.
You look.
Ma'am. Welcome to Seeing is Believing, an Oculos Media production where we explore the soul of film. I'm Christopher Wagner, and I'm here with award-winning director Jose Acosta and esteemed film critic Stephen Michael Brown. And we're going to lead off with a review of Barbenheimer. Stephen, take it away.
It is great to be joining both of you for this podcast, and I look forward to sharing our review.
Welcome.
So typically when two major Hollywood studios counter-program on the same day, it's a formula for mutually assured destruction. But this summer's release of two films by major writer-directors, namely Christopher Nolan with Oppenheimer and Greta Gerwig with Barbie, have both emerged as champions of the box office. Barbenheimer, as the kids are calling it, as they've dubbed it on Instagram and Twitter/X, is a double bill that has become the cultural touchstone of the summer and definitely a lot to examine. So Oppenheimer is an unconventional historical biopic about the so-called father of the atomic bomb, Robert Oppenheimer, in a film that plays with time, cross-cutting between black and white montages regarded as fact and color sequences to get inside the man's memories. It's a sprawling cast with Cillian Murphy doing complex work as a conflicted character, and actors ranging from Matt Damon to Josh Hartnett to Robert Downey Jr. playing soldiers, scientists, politicos, and more in a chess game about whether you win the war but lose your conscience in the process. I think the director commands sharp dialogue, stunning cinematography, propulsive music, and more to tell his epic tale, and it's a sophisticated motion picture with topics of faith and ethics, and I think it's highly recommended. The other film in this completely unexpected double bill is Barbie, which, although based on the classic doll and her dream house lore, is a very sharp satire on the roles of men and women in contemporary society and is fashioned with more sincerity than I think we were expecting from its plastic origins. Margot Robbie plays a character called Stereotypical Barbie, a tan and blonde and very happy woman going about Malibu's seaside life with bliss until she discovers the person playing with her in the real world is going through a bit of a dark time, a bit of a crisis of conscience. Greta Gerwig brilliantly guides her characters on a journey in which the protagonist must face both the person who puppeteers her and also her creator in a comic and cosmic tale. And I think everybody in the ensemble is really wonderful, namely America Ferrera, Issa Rae, and the hilarious Ryan Gosling, who plays the vapid boyfriend Ken, who ends up learning about big adult stuff like the patriarchy and male fragility. There's lots of pop psychology to plumb on Barbie's dream couch, and I think the movie in general is just masterfully constructed with colorful, candy-coated sets, costumes, most importantly, a really tricky look at the dolls which may have inspired many and also turned off many others. Right. I can scarcely believe that Mattel let Greta Gerwig make exactly the movie she wanted to make. Yeah, it's a Barbie movie, but it's her movie, and I think it's bitingly meta, it's very funny, and it's highly recommended from me. We'll see in a moment if we all agree on that, but friends, we have a lot to talk about and with these two popular movies, and I'll turn it back over to you, Chris.
Well, we're going to start with Oppenheimer, but right now I'd like to leave it to the group because, Stephen, that was beautiful. Jose, do you have any comments that you would like to...
I just want to agree that Stephen's reviews are just so well written and put together, and I have reactions to the film. I have reactions to the reviews that kind of deepen my understanding of the films. So I felt... Let's cut to the chase. I felt it was a masterpiece. I thought it was Christopher Nolan's best film, and that's saying a lot when you see his filmography, starting with Memento. I mean, he started with an Academy Award-nominated film and recently did Dunkirk, Tenet, a lot of other great films. Among my favorites are Inception and... oh gosh, I didn't write this one down. It's
what's it about? Is it the one about magic, or is it the one about
the one about
The Prestige?
Not Memento. Oh, the Prestige was great.
The Prestige is the
fantastic
hidden gem of the Christopher Nolan films.
Yeah.
But this one is his first biopic. It's the first historical movie other than Dunkirk that he did, and it's they're really emphasizing the historical accuracy. There's a few artistic turns in it, but it was so well cast, so well acted. The cinematography is among the best ever. They even invented a new type of film, as you were pointing
New
out.
black and
Stephen.
white stock to even make
Exactly. The practical effects to do, to depict the development of a nuclear bomb with all in-camera effects is just stunning, and the editing was masterful. He's known for jumping around time and having very complex storytelling structure. Sometimes people have criticized this about Christopher Nolan films, but in this case, I felt that the story was very intuitive to follow, even at that complex level. So he's a filmmaker that really engages the mind more than the heart, and here he did both very, very well. I'm expecting a lot of a buzz during award season.
Right.
So I felt he played to his strengths and also eliminated any shortcomings he might have as a creative filmmaker. In the press junkets, they're saying things like, we tried to take this historical story and film it like a suspense thriller or even a horror movie. And very much people are reacting that way and considering the ethical issues that it brings up and how we're all kind of participating in. Perhaps Oppenheimer in some ways is a stand-in for us as Americans who have developed nuclear weapons. And then we talk about, ending nuclear proliferation, right? It's like this disconnect between these two policies. And he's a microcosm of that. I'm a little spoilery sometimes, so you guys stop me, but there's a bit of a microcosm, as my daughter called it.
Define microcosm, if
a
you would, Jose.
microcosm. There's some foreshadowing. I'll say that.
Okay.
There's some foreshadowing early in the film, where Oppenheimer plays a prank with an apple that might have some unhealthy substances in it on the desk of his teacher.
That's
And
right.
this is kind of an apocryphal story about Oppenheimer in his time in Cambridge that's may or may not be true, but he does something very dangerous that endangers somebody's life, and then he changes his mind, runs to the classroom in the morning to prevent that from harming anybody. And that's kind of tells the entire story of the film right at the beginning.
Wow.
In a
I'll
very
spoil it. It's a poison cyanide apple.
Oh, that's
And
right.
perhaps-
it was like that was very Snow White-like too.
Very fairy tale, very Garden of Eden.
Yeah,
very Garden
Garden
of
of
Eden.
Eden.
Let's say
Thinking about this.
Genesis.
That's
Okay,
right.
so this is the forbidden fruit, right? And we bit the forbidden
Perhaps.
fruit when we found out how to split the atom and release a chain reaction, which is the concept of the chain reaction is discovered during the film.
We had a moment where it looked like the chain reaction from an atomic device might never stop.
Are we saying there's a chance that when we push that button, we destroy the world?
And I'm a big buff of physics and the history of science, and so all of this was easy for me to understand, but I felt that Chris Nolan also made it accessible for the audience in general.
And to be clear on the story of Eden, you may eat from any tree in the garden, but you may not eat from the tree of knowledge. And my goodness, now we know why, right? I tell you what, my takeaway from Oppenheimer, if I might, you talked about the structure of the film. Quantum physics, right? It's such a complex subject as it is. I can't even begin to understand it, right? But there's proportion, there's simplicity, and there's evidential beauty in it. And my goodness, Christopher Nolan found a way to piece together the most disparate parts of this movie and make the structure not just work, but make complete sense. Unbelievable. Stephen, what is it?
Yeah, no, you can follow along really well in
Yeah.
it. I think there's definitely a notion that the director of a movie can almost feel like a god, which I know is one thing to say, but that person is manipulating the audience, they're manipulating their cast and crew and all the things to make something happen. I felt like there was a really omniscient director presence in this movie, and he's choosing to tell the things in the order he's telling them to give us a little bit of a parable about life.
Right.
So we're actually looking back at think about men in the Bible who may have had great burdens that they were holding, whether it's the Moses or the Abraham or the David.
Yes.
And it's somebody who had some major burden that they're having to hold, and you're having to wrestle with all the different notions of that. He's not showing it in order. He's showing sort of the conflict of man, the frailty, the problems of man, and really just telling us in the way that's almost looking down from the first droplet of water that's seen in the first scene through the sparks of imagination.
Oh,
He's
the
doing it
sparks
in
are
an
the best.
order that you still can follow, but it's very omniscient. It's very godlike.
It really is. And I'll tell you what, I was, as we were discussing this film earlier, I got to thinking about Jonah, the story of Jonah, how he was endowed with this knowledge by God, but he didn't want to share that knowledge at first. And I found an interesting parallel when he goes to the garden, when he's getting hired, when Cillian Murphy playing Oppenheimer is hired at the Physics Institute to take over, and he goes out and he meets no one but Albert Einstein. We don't know what was said in that interaction until the end, but I think about the message that God wanted to say to Jonah. Hey, go to the city of Nineveh, because you tell that knowledge, you will save it. Perhaps Cillian Murphy held on to the knowledge that Einstein gave him so long and went through this living hell like Jonah in the well, which the story really isn't that much different. And then you see the redemption at the end. How long it took, how painful it was. I felt for Oppenheimer, and I also thought about scandal in my life, and I think about my faith, and my faith tells me not to scandalize myself at times, with the way I behave. And cheating on your wife, I'm thinking like the King David thing. That's inexcusable behavior. I like that the family stayed together in some way, shape, or form. That might have been toxic, but as a man that was esteemed as Oppenheimer, to behave as irresponsibly as he did, I almost feel like he wanted to punish himself by testifying the way he did and being as absorbed in trying to redeem himself, which finally, as far as we know, happens in Oppenheimer's story. But you have to go see the film.
Christopher, you're a veteran of military too. Can you tell us what that struck you that way?
Yeah, there was a tough moment in there. I had a realization that a lot of people who are watching this film have never had to make a decision like dropping a bomb on other individuals. And having been in combat and witnessed it and called fire missions myself, I had a physical reaction to this film, particularly when the bomb was getting ready to be dropped. And there's a moment of silence and heaviness when that explosion happens. And I just remember feeling that way in some circumstances like that and seeing it, seeing that reaction. But you know who really crushed it? Matt Damon. I thought about...
What a segue.
Oh my gosh. Dude, I thought about the times that I was out in the field and I
He plays a soldier.
And then on the test runs, dropping a 500-pound bomb, seeing it before my eyes, boom! But you don't hear it. You don't hear anything. You're caught up in the moment, and then all of a sudden, you feel it. Vroom, the bomb it reverberates. It shakes the earth, and then there's that moment. It's intense, but you can't feel anything but numb, quiet, and then your ears are ringing because it's loud. But
there's a subtle, thing that Christopher Nolan is paying attention to all the details, and you see the explosion seconds before you hear it. Right. The light that was like sunlight from that Trinity test came first, and total silence on the soundtrack, and then an overwhelming explosion. And I have to imagine, I can only imagine that a veteran like Christopher, got very emotional at that moment, as did the people historically in Los Alamos doing that test. They were troubled. They were celebrating their success, and they were also troubled by the implications of it, because this was releasing exponentially more energy than had ever been released artificially by human beings ever in history.
Right.
Christopher Nolan sometimes would say things like, this is perhaps the most consequential person in history. Mm-hmm. Of course, we as people of faith think there's someone else that might be the most consequential person in history. Right. You brought that up, Stephen. And I think Oppenheimer is certainly in the conversation today, as in the 20th century and 21st century, of the implications of his discovery are very troubling.
Can I piggyback on that real quick?
Yeah, but I also want to say
there was a moment.
I also want to say, Christopher, thank you for your service. And can I just fit this in? Is that Oppenheimer is, you see him overly rewarded for his accomplishment first. And that's very difficult for him to deal with emotionally. And then punished when he says, hey, maybe we should limit the use of this weapon. Mm-hmm. And he's punished for that. And I have to think that veterans hear that and identify with it.
It wasn't something that immediately struck me. But when it did strike me, guys, is when Cillian Murphy, playing Oppenheimer, is in front of the screen and a projector, and they're about to see the pictures in the aftermath of, it was either Hiroshima or Nagasaki. And I just remember the moment that the slides start, you're not seeing the pictures, you're seeing the reaction. And Cillian Murphy sharply looks down, and he is unable to look back up. And my goodness, I've seen that so many times before in my life. And that's the heaviness of the film. And I also want to bring up a point, guys. You know, this movie is about nuclear annihilation, right? It's the tree of knowledge. We have nuclear weapons now that are out there, and it's very troubling to me that there is so much instability in this world, yet many countries who are the epitome of that instability have access to nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
I think we should all pause, and I think if we really want to lean into a higher power here, I think it'd be appropriate we all pray. We're at a pretty dangerous time. And so, like, and if you're a Catholic or a Christian and you're wondering if this is a Catholic or Christian film, both of them, no. We're talking about things that we saw from a spiritual perspective, because that's the beauty of film, right? We can internalize and take things a certain way. Just like Jose, why would it be inappropriate for me to ask you what Christopher Nolan was trying to say when he was making Oppenheimer? What was he trying to say?
Oh, well, and we had discussed this in preparation, and I did some research, and Christopher Nolan and his cast at the press junkets are all emphasizing, this is not a didactic film. And so I looked up the word didactic immediately.
There we go.
And found out that it's not a simple story with a simple moral.
Yeah.
It's supposed to provoke thought and conversation, and I think that that's what an artist's role in our society is, not to tell us the answer, but to provoke us to find the answer. And
wow.
So he's guiding us through this story from a certain perspective, but we're free to think, oh, perhaps Oppenheimer's security clearance should have been revoked. There's reasons to think that maybe it should have been.
Certainly.
There's also perhaps Oppenheimer was a person who had a complicated relationship with the truth, as we say. And I earlier, after calling it a masterpiece, I'd say I would drop 2 shots from that masterpiece, and I think it would be an even better masterpiece. Who am I to criticize either of these accomplished filmmakers? But, as a filmmaker, I see that there was 2 moments in which Florence Pugh was used as a character.
These are the love scenes.
The love scenes, but they were distracting from the main storyline. The love scenes should have been there, but they should have been less distracting and let the story, move organically.
That surprised me too with Christopher Nolan. I didn't think he would have gone there. It was interesting.
Yeah. And he doesn't seem like the type of person that would cave to studio pressure or anybody else to do something like that, perhaps for marketing reasons.
Yeah.
So I'm a little perplexed why that was there.
Well, I have a feeling.
Yeah.
I have a feeling because we realize Oppenheimer, all the content that was in this film, particularly the sexually explicit content, that was stuff Oppenheimer said and testified. He was stripped of his dignity, and you could make an argument that the people that he was philandering, the person he was philandering with, was stripped of hers. I got the very Bathsheba type of King David-y story, particularly with the power of, you think of, if you aren't familiar with the story of King David and you aren't familiar with the Ark of the Covenant, go look at, what was the name? Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, the power of the Ark of the Covenant, very nuclear style. And I think of, wow, with great power comes great responsibility. And what do men often do with that great responsibility? Philander and mess it all up. And that almost happened to Mr. Oppenheimer, but he redeemed himself. But I think also, given the heaviness of this film, what a great time to talk about Barbie and the good things in this world. For goodness sake, right? Just so much joy I thought that I got from that film. It was filled with joy. Now, some people didn't have the same reactions. Stephen, why don't you take us off?
Sure. You heard my review. I was pretty bullish on Barbie.
Right.
And I will say, as somebody who feels like you don't get that side of the story very often. You think about the Barbie and Ken character in this, and Barbie's the protagonist, and Ken sort of feels like the side character that's not really, not asked much about what his thoughts are as she's going on her journey. And it twists a little bit, and this is written by Greta Gerwig and her life partner, Noah Baumbach. And I think there's a lot in the movie of sort of their relationship and like, well, when does that twist? Can I give my supporting spouse or partner that bit of love in the movie? And it sort of twists around a little bit. So I think it played with that. I think a lot of people are going to think this is a movie that's maybe for the young kids. They're going to love the color and the characters and stuff, but this is bringing up some big issues. And it's PG-13. There are some questions that maybe your very young kids might ask you. Be prepared for it.
Well, I would like to provide an interesting anecdote to
Please
that,
do,
Stephen Michael
as a
Brown,
dad.
if I may. So I have a 9-year-old daughter. I almost said she was 8. Leah, if you're watching, I know. I got the age right this time. That's what dads do. I'll tell you what. My ex-wife made a decision to go ahead and take Leah to see Barbie, and actually missed that it was a PG-13 rating. So would I have preferred that my 9-year-old daughter be 13 to see this movie? Absolutely. Am I happy that she watched it? Absolutely. I'm totally cool with it. And you want to know why? I saw so many aspects of goodness in Barbie. Particularly, we talk about this Old Testament concept with Oppenheimer, but Barbie acts very Christ-like in many ways, and I see it the way she goes out and wills the good for other people, and wants to be an example, and wants to build up this happy team and this happy, loving world.
She's being sent into the world.
She's sent into the world
to spread love, right?
To spread love. And the first thing that happens to her, is her interaction in a middle school where she has, like, it broke my heart. I thought about my daughter standing there before the
character doesn't like her in that scene.
The character does not like Barbie in this scene because of the baggage with Barbie as a commercial figure, right? And so body images, you name it. Dresses Barbie up and down with negativity, and then at the end calls her a fascist. But how many, in my life, when I've wanted to do good for people, I ever think about the first time I showed up in uniform to go see my mom at work and there was an anti-war protest. It actually didn't go that well for me, and I thought about Barbie. The way she was just wanting to do nothing but good for this 13-year-old who despised her. But she cared nothing more than that girl's ability to say what she means. That's beautiful. What did you think about that?
I can certainly identify with the concept of being put into a category. Like, right, you make one comment about something and then somebody comes to the conclusion, oh, he's a left wing or he's a right wing or he fits into this category,
right.
She fits into that category. And we have dumbed down the conversation in this country. We have politicized every little issue, and you're supposed to be you're supposed to be a team player and be part of this and part of that. And I thought I think by the end of Barbie, I think it comes to the conclusion that you should be an individual,
right,
and accept your humanity and have self-love despite your flaws. And I thought it was good to come to that conclusion at the end of the film.
Nice.
Along the way, I thought it was, let's say, surfacey. If Oppenheimer is a cup of black coffee that's going to wake you up, Barbie is some sugar. You're going to get a sugar high, and by the time I walked out of the theater, I was like, I had 2 hours of entertainment, but that's about it. This having high expectations because Greta Gerwig is among the most admired directors out there and had 2 just genius movies as her debut with Little Women and Lady Bird that I really dug. And then I was like a little perplexed. She's gonna try to take on this commercial IP, kind of like a comic book character, in this case a toy, and say something interesting with it. And certainly, did more than most people would be able to do with that. But I thought it was kind of limited by the fact that she's depicting a plastic doll.
Sure.
I think a lot of the standouts for the movie for a lot of people is the comedy. I mean, it is a comedy. There are broadly funny things, pranks, different pratfalls that happen in it, and people remember sort of the supporting character of Ken being kind of this lovable doofus that doesn't know his place in the world and tries to find it in some weird ways. But I honestly, the first time I saw it, I found it to be very emotional.
Yeah.
Like there are some times, America Ferrera's monologue in it, that's going to hit people. I definitely think there are a lot of moments where I know, I'll put myself in the category, I might have cried 3 times in Barbie, and I wasn't going into this entertainment, plasticky movie thinking that there'd be moments that could touch the lives of how women are seen in the world, how people could see their daughters or their mothers.
Right.
And I just thought that there was a lot to it. So I
Absolutely.
respectfully, my friend is, hey, I didn't go 2 hours and feel like I was entertained the whole time.
Right.
I actually, it was like, oh, later on I'm remembering lines and how funny something was.
Yes.
But I felt like her character was so misunderstood in the real world, and I think a lot of people can relate to it. I think why you say you like your 9-year-old having seen it is because of that. Like
That's
she sees the
exactly
chance
it.
that she can raise herself up from the bootstraps, and even though the world tells you this, it can be this.
That's it.
And I don't think that movie gets made a lot.
That's true. And I learned a little bit, not just my 9-year-old, but I learned a little bit about myself in the way Ken behaved after kind of, not necessarily the breakup, but
He kind of becomes like a brewski and horses kind of
He
guy.
dives into the bro culture, man. He's got the Mojo Dojo Casa House going on, and my daughter thought that was hilarious. And then when we started talking about the Mojo Dojo Casa House, which is so awesome to say,
Which is his take on her dream house. He
guess
takes
who wants
over
to
it.
see it now? My 12-year-old son. And you know what I told him? You got to wait till you're 13. Sorry.
Wow.
Just
Wow.
kidding. But then he knew I was kidding, or was I? But I'll tell you, there was a with Barbie, one of the other really fun things, the things that my daughter liked, was actually Ken's character development. I think that's really important to see. Isn't it interesting how bro culture of this battle of the sexes, this proverbial battle of the sexes, which we constantly deal with, right? That's just part of our humanity. Isn't it interesting how the toxic forms on either side are born out of resentment? I think that even if you don't intend to hurt somebody, that being cognizant or mindful, just like Oppenheimer, I think that was his way of apologizing. I think Barbie was just trying to show some empathy, which is something that was huge in her character development, because this is a film about self-actualization. I mean, Ken resented being, he felt ignored by Barbie. He was totally into her. And my daughter told me this, Dad, I learned it's important if you like somebody, you just tell them, all right? And then you give them their space. You don't need to be all over them, looking at her all the time. And I was like, wow, that was pretty good relationship advice. She says she's a mature 9-year-old. I'd rather she just stay 9, but.
Right. I think that was a positive lesson in the film, that it's okay to say no.
Sure.
But also say, be kind and gentle with the no, right?
Charitable.
Like I don't want to hurt your feelings, but I don't have those same feelings for you that you have for me.
Right.
But I still respect you and want to be friends. And I think that that's a great lesson for teens. I think this is well-suited film for teens and young adults. They're really going to get a kick out of it.
Yeah.
I felt like this was water under the bridge for me. I didn't feel like that spoke to me as much, but I think that certainly there's some young people. Now, I had, just like you, I had friends who took their 10-year-old daughter and said, oops, this was PG-13.
There were some questions. Let's talk about some of those questions.
I didn't feel it was offensive to young people, but I felt that it kind of was maybe a little over their head.
The 2 questions that I got, one, they bring up the human anatomy. So
Barbie typically and Ken don't have a lot of that, really.
That. And then she was going to bring that up. I asked her what she thought was inappropriate, and she also said she goes, Dad, what were Ken and Barbie going to do? Why did he want to stay over there that night?
I thought I might stay over tonight.
Why?
Because we're girlfriend, boyfriend.
To do what?
And I said, Leah, do we really want to have this conversation? And she looked at me and said, no. And so, so we just moved.
It was rhetorical. It was a rhetorical question.
It was a rhetorical exercise.
Repress.
But there's really something else gripping from a faith perspective that I do want to talk about.
Sure,
this
sure.
is cool. Like particularly looking and visualizing God through a woman as well, right? Rhea Perlman has a moment with Barbie where they're in this almost heavenly state. And without making a spoiler alert, Barbie is confused as to what she should do. And Rhea Perlman, playing the role of Mattel, right?
She plays the inventor of the Barbie doll.
Of the Barbie doll from Mattel. Great character, very almost godlike figure. But she tells Barbie, walk with me. Walk with me. And I think about the times that I'm in trouble and where I really just want a deeper connection beyond what I get from people or things. And I turn to my Lord, and what does he tell me to do? He says to walk with me. And for my daughter to get the same feeling, that was pretty neat. So
both of these directors have taken something that we think we know,
yeah,
and they've actually taken it back and brought us back a parable about our world.
That's it.
That actually tells us more about ourselves than even a plastic doll or
Yeah.
a guy from history could tell us. And I think that's what they did in these movies. Is they came back, they brought the story to us, and put yourself in that. Put yourself in Oppenheimer's experience. What would it be like if you had the brains to make this atom bomb, but also had to be the one who made the atom bomb?
Oh my
And you're
goodness.
trying to make
Can you
your
imagine?
country
And the
win the war
consequences, yeah.
and have those consequences, that burden. So I think those two directors brought us a pretty incredible set of movies to have landed on the same day and the same year.
It's a phenomenon, and you know what? It's almost as if it was divinely inspired, because when you look at the release dates and how this managed to work out, and I think there's actually
There's
a
real
side
reasons
story.
for it.
There is real reasons. I
Studio
wanna talk about
bickering
it.
and like what they
Yes.
put there. Nolan used to be with one of the studios. The other one put their time on that day, and it just ended up being that people decided that a really heavy movie and what looked like a really light movie
Right.
would be a really funny thing to start mashing up.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
And
guess
it
what?
Turned out they were both really good.
See both on the same day, and it was actually, I've heard, the fourth best box office of all time, measured in dollars.
That's awesome. We're back, y'all. Movies
Yeah.
are back.
Movies are back.
big way.
And by the way, that data comes from boxofficemojo.com.
We like box office.
We should get them
We
as
like
a
our
sponsor
stats.
someday,
Yeah.
maybe.
And I'll tell you that. I'll work on that. I think this is really important here. Barbenheimer. It works. It wasn't supposed to work. They weren't supposed to be released together. It works because we have two cultural icons standing up together with brilliant stories, and these artists were able to find a way to help us connect to them in a way that I think is absolutely relevant. And what an honor to talk to two experts like you about such great films.
Thank
I
you
really-
for bringing us together. This is fun today.
Yeah.
It's been so much fun. This is awesome.
It's a blast. We're going to have to do this again. You realize this.
We should.
Probably
Thanks,
in a month.
Christopher.
I want to thank our audience for experiencing Seeing is Believing, where we capture the soul of film. Gentlemen, I think we did our job today. Jose, Steven, thank you. And to our audience, if you like what we did, please be sure to like, subscribe, or leave your comments. See you next month.